when I was in Fallujah, doctors would talk about this, but one could write about this, and one couldn't really prove it from anecdotal evidence. Now, this is a study, a scientific study, based on interviews with 4,800 people, which proves that this was in fact happening and is happening. And of course, it has taken place so much later than the siege of Fallujah, when it was heavily bombarded in 2004 by the US military. Because previously, Fallujah is such a dangerous place to this day, difficult to carry out a survey, but it's been finally done, and the results are pretty extraordinary.
What were the various weapons that were used in the bombing of Fallujah in 2004?
Well, primarily it was sort of, artillery and bombing. Initially it was denied that white phosphorus had been used, but later this was confirmed. I think one shouldn't lose sight of the fact in this case that before one thinks about was depleted uranium use and other things, that just simply the use of large quantities of high explosives in a city filled with civilians and people packed into houses, often you find whole families living in one room, was in itself going to lead to very, very high civilian casualties. But that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about the increase in cancers and so forth, and the suspicion that maybe depleted uranium, maybe some other weapon, which we don't know about. This is not my speculation, but of one of the professors who carried out the study, might have been employed in Fallujah, and that would be an explanation for results which parallel, in fact exceed the illnesses subsequently suffered by survivors of Hiroshima.
It's interesting, under President Bush, Afghanistan was the forgotten war. Under President Obama, Iraq is the forgotten war, Patrick.
Yeah, it's interesting, and it's very depressing, I think, that I suppose the great success of the surge wasn't really militarily, but to get Iraq off the front pages and leading television news in the United States. And, people speak of Iraq being better. I suppose it is better. We only have about 300 people murdered every month rather than 3,000 a month we had a few years ago. But it's still extremely bad. But it is very strange that, last weekend we have 40 pilgrims killed in a southern Iraqi city by a bomb. And really, you'd have to hunt through the media to find any mention of this at all. And this is, continually happening. But it was if Iraq had returned to some sort of peace. Well, actually, it remains one of the most violent countries in the world. Maybe Somalia is worse, but not many other places.
And this continuing inability of the Iraqi leadership to even form a functioning government, yet that gets no attention any longer here in the U.S. press?
Yeah, I think it's happened because the surge, everything else that was oversold as a solution. Secondly, American soldiers are no longer being killed. Thirdly, they are being killed in Afghanistan. So I think you have almost over-coverage of Afghanistan and under-coverage of Iraq, which is, as you mentioned, an exact reverse of the situation we had a few years ago when Afghanistan was a sort of, not just a forgotten war, but nobody knew a war was taking place.
Finally, the significance of August 31st, U.S. saying it's going to reduce the size of its forces in Iraq to 50,000. And does that include military contractors?
I don't think it does. No, they'll remain. But I think that the pullout is quite genuine. Some people have been skeptical about this, but I think that with the situation in Afghanistan, I can't see the administration wanting to remain on in Iraq.
And you point out, Patrick Cockburn, also that General Electric has agreed to pay more than $23 million to settle bribery charges relating to Iraq.
Sure, I mean, it's sort of, in general terms, I mean, this is one case, but in general terms, you know, there's been, Iraq has gained the reputation as, I think there's an organization, Transparency International, being one of the most corrupt countries in the world. And, you know, it's again, going back to a point we were talking about earlier, that there was some reason for this in perhaps the first year or two of the occupation. I remember the entire military procurement budget of $1.2 billion just disappeared, got stolen. But, you know, this is sort of really going on to this day, that they, and this is sort of a real sign, I think, of a dysfunctional government. And, you know, that's what most Iraqis feel. They just can't understand so long after the war why they're still only getting a few hours electricity and there's no clean water, and you know, the situation is not getting better.
Patrick Cockburn, I want to thank you for being with us, Middle East correspondent for the London Independent, author of several books on Iraq. This is Democracy Now! We'll be back in a minute.